Hello, and thank you for joining me for chapter 2 of Women Who Run with the Wolves. Today we are delving into the Bluebeardian tale, and the title of this chapter is Stalking the Intruder, the Beginning Initiation. And it's the famous Bluebeard tale that has had many interpretations and many dissections, but I truly love Clarissa Pinkola Estes' take on this gruesome tale. It's quite a complex story with many layers, and we're going to try and unpack and delve into them as best we can. I've done the artwork to this. I found it quite a challenge to find the correct facial features and expression to represent Bluebeard and the young girl in the story. So you'll see as we go along, there are a few chops and changes as I wasn't quite happy with the end result. It's almost metaphorical in a way, trying to uncover these layers and understand Bluebeard in our lives and the whole archetypal story. Anyway, it's quite a long story, so I'm going to get stuck in and let's begin. I hope you enjoy it. In a single human being, there are many other beings, all with their own values, motives, and devices. Some psychological technologies suggest we arrest these beings, count them, name them, force them into harness till they shuffle along like vanquished slaves. But to do this would halt the dance of wildish lights in a woman's eyes. It would halt her heat lightning and arrest all throwing of sparks. Rather than corrupt her natural beauty, our work is to build for all these beings a wildish countryside wherein the artists among them can make, the lovers love, the healers heal. But what shall we do with those inner beings who are quite mad and those who carry out destruction without thought? Even these must be given a place, though one in which they can be contained. One entity in particular, the most deceitful and most powerful fugitive in the psyche, requires our immediate consciousness and containment, and that one is the natural predator. While the cause of much human suffering can be traced to negligent fostering, there is also within the psyche, naturally, an innate contra naturam aspect, an against nature force. The contra naturam aspect opposes the positive. It is against development, against harmony, and against the wild. It is a derisive and murderous antagonist that is born into us. And even with the best parental nurture, the intruder's sole assignment is to attempt to turn all crossroads into closed roads. This predatory potentate shows up time after time in women's dreams. It erupts in the midst of their most soulful and meaningful plans. It severs the woman from her intuitive nature. When its cutting work is done, it leaves the woman deadened in feeling frail to advance her life. Her ideas and dreams lay at her feet, drained of animation. Bluebeard is a story of such a matter. In North America, the best-known Bluebeard versions are the French and the German. But I prefer my literary version in which the French and the Slavic are mingled, like the one given to me by my Aunt Katie, who lived in Săbrac near Dombovar in Hungary. Among our cadre of farm woman tellers, the Bluebeard tale is begun with an anecdote about someone who knew someone who knew someone who had seen the grisly proof of Bluebeard's demise. And so we begin. There is a hank of beard which is kept at the convent of the White Nuns in the far mountains. How it came to the convent no one knows. Some say it was the nuns who buried what was left of his body, for no one else would touch it. Why the nuns would keep such a relic is unknown, but it is true. My friend's friend has seen it with her own eyes. She says the beard is blue, indigo-colored to be exact. It is as blue as the dark ice in the lake, as blue as the shadow of a hole at night. This beard was once worn by one who they say was a failed magician, a giant man with an eye for woman, a man known by the name of Bluebeard. 'Twas said he courted 3 sisters at the same time, but they were frightened of his beard with its odd blue cast, and so they hid when he called. In an effort to convince them of his geniality, he invited them on an outing in the forest. He arrived leading horses arrayed in bells and crimson ribbons. He set the sisters and their mother upon the horses, and off they cantered into the forest. There they had the most wonderful day riding, and their dogs ran beside and ahead. Later they stopped beneath a giant tree, and Bluebeard regaled them with stories and fed them dainty treats. The sisters began to think, well, perhaps this man Bluebeard is not so bad after all. They returned home all a chatter about how interesting the day had been, and did they not have a good time? Yet the 2 older sisters' suspicions and fears returned, and they vowed not to see Bluebeard again. But the youngest sister thought if a man could be that charming, then perhaps he was not so bad. The more she talked to herself, the less awful he seemed, and also the less blue his beard. So when Bluebeard asked for her hand in marriage, she accepted. She had given his proposal great thought and felt she was to marry a very elegant man. Marry they did, and after rode off to his castle in the woods. One day he came to her and said, I must go away for a time. Invite your family here if you like. You may ride in the woods, charge the cooks to set a feast. You may do anything you like, anything your heart desires. In fact, here is my ring of keys. You may open any and every door to the storerooms, the money rooms, any door in the castle. But this little tiny key, the one with the scroll work on top, do not use. His bride replied, Yes, I will do as you ask. It all sounds very fine. So go, my dear husband, and do not have a worry, and come back soon. And so off he rode, and she stayed. Her sisters came to visit, and they were, as all souls are, very curious about what the master had said was to be done while he was away. The young wife gaily told them, He said we may do anything we desire, and enter any room we wish, except one. But I don't know which one it is. I just have a key, and I don't know which door it fits. The sisters decided to make a game of finding which key fit which door. The castle was 3 stories high, with 100 doors in each wing, and as there were many keys on the ring, they crept from door to door, having an immensely good time, throwing open each door. Behind one door were the kitchen stores, behind another the money stores. All manner of holdings were behind the doors, and everything seemed more wonderful all the time. At last, having seen all these marvels, they came finally to the cellar, and, at the end of the corridor, a blank wall. They puzzled over the last key, the one with the little scroll work on top. Maybe this key doesn't fit anything at all. As they said this, they heard an odd sound. They peeked around the corner, and lo and behold, there was a small door just closing. When they tried to open it again, it was firmly locked. One cried, Sister, sister, bring your key. Surely this is the door for that mysterious little key. Without a thought, one of the sisters put the key in the door and turned it. The lock scolded, the door swung open, but it was so dark inside they could not see. Sister, sister, bring a candle. So a candle was lit and held into the room, and all three women screamed at once, for in the room was a mire of blood, and the blackened bones of corpses were flung about, and skulls were stacked in corners like pyramids of apples. They slammed the door shut, shook the key out of the lock, and leaned against one another, gasping, breasts heaving. "My God! My God!" The wife looked down at the key and saw it was stained with blood. Horrified, she used the skirt of her gown to wipe it clean, but the blood prevailed. "Oh no!" she cried. Each sister took the tiny key in her hands and tried to make it as it once was, but the blood remained. The wife hid the tiny key in her pocket and ran to the cook's kitchen. When she arrived, her white dress was stained red from pocket to hem, for the key was slowly weeping drops of dark red blood. She ordered the cook, "Quick, give me some horsehair." She scoured the key, but it would not stop bleeding. Drop after drop of pure red blood issued from the tiny key. She took the key outdoors, and from the oven she pressed ashes onto it and scrubbed some more. She held it to the heat to sear it. She laid cobweb over it to staunch the flow, but nothing could make the weeping blood subside. "Oh, what am I to do?" she cried. "I know. I'll put the little key away. I'll put it in the wardrobe. I'll close the door. This is a bad dream. All will be all right." And this she did do. Her husband came home the very next morning, and he strode into the castle, calling for his wife. "Well, how was it while I was away?" "It was very fine, sir." "And how are my storerooms?" he rumbled. "Very fine, sir." "How are my money rooms?" he growled. "The money rooms are very fine also, sir." "So everything is good, wife?" "Yes, everything is good." "Well," he whispered, "then you'd best return my keys." Within a glance he saw a key was missing. "Where is the smallest key?" I lost it. Yes, I lost it. I was out riding and the key ring fell down and I must have lost a key." "What have you done with it, woman?" I don't remember." "Don't lie to me. Tell me what you did with that key." He put his hand to her face as if to caress her cheek, but instead seized her hair. "You infidel!" he snarled, and threw her to the floor. "You've been into the room, haven't you?" He threw open her wardrobe, and the little key on the top shelf had bled blood red down all the beautiful silks of her gowns hanging there. "Now it's your turn, my lady," he screamed, and dragged her down the hall and into the cellar till they were before the terrible door. Bluebeard merely looked at the door with his fiery eyes, and the door opened for him. There lay the skeletons of all his previous wives. "And now," he roared. But she caught hold of the door frame and would not let go. She pleaded for her life. "Please, please allow me to compose myself and prepare for my death. Give me but a quarter hour before you take my life, so I can make my peace with God." "All right," he snarled. "You have but a quarter of an hour, but be ready." The wife raced up the stairs to her chamber and posted her sisters on the castle ramparts. She knelt to pray, but instead called out to her sisters, "Sisters, sisters, do you see our brothers coming?" "We see nothing, nothing on the open plains." Every few moments she cried up to the ramparts, "Sisters, sisters, do you see our brothers coming?" "We see a whirlwind, perhaps a dust devil in the distance." Meanwhile, Bluebeard roared for his wife to come to the cellar so he could behead her. Again she called out, "Sisters, sisters, do you see our brothers coming?" Bluebeard shouted for his wife again and began to clomp up the stone steps. Her sisters cried out, "Yes, we see them. Our brothers are here and they have just entered the castle." Bluebeard strode down the hall towards his wife's chamber. "I am coming to get you," he bellowed. His footfalls were dense. The rocks in the hallway came loose. The sand from the mortar poured onto the floor. As Bluebeard lumbered into her chamber with his hands outstretched to seize her, her brothers on horseback galloped down the castle hallway and charged into her room as well. There they routed Bluebeard out onto the parapet. There and then, with swords, they advanced upon him, striking and slashing, cutting and whipping, beating Bluebeard down to the ground, killing him at last, and leaving for the buzzards his blood and gristle. A very gruesome tale indeed. Wow, and quite shocking too. It almost shocks us awake. And I think that's the intention of such a tale, is to awaken in us that awareness of the predator, the dark force that is Bluebeard, that resides deep down in our psyche. Let's get on to Clarissa's interpretation and dissection of the tale. The natural predator of the psyche. Developing a relationship with the wildish nature is an essential part of woman's individuation. In order to accomplish this, a woman must go into the dark, but at the same time, she must not be irreparably trapped, captured, or killed on her way there or back. The Bluebeard story is about that captor, the dark man who inhabits all women's psyches, the innate predator. He is a specific and incontrovertible force which must be memorized and restrained. To restrain the natural predator of the psyche, it is necessary for women to remain in possession of all their instinctual powers. Some of these are insight, intuition, endurance, tenacious loving, keen sensing, far vision, acute hearing, singing over the dead, intuitive healing, and tending to their own creative fires. In psychological interpretation, we call on all aspects of the fairy tale to represent the drama within a single woman's psyche. Bluebeard represents a deeply reclusive complex which lurks at the edge of all women's lives, watching, waiting for an opportunity to oppose her. Although it may symbolize itself similarly or differently in men's psyches, it is the ancient and contemporary foe of both genders. It is difficult to completely comprehend the Bluebeardian force, for it is innate, meaning indigenous to all humans from birth forward, and in that sense is without conscious origin. Yet I believe we have a hint of how its nature developed in the preconscious of humans. For in the story, Bluebeard is called a failed magician. In this occupation, he is related to figures in other fairy tales, which also portray the malignant predator of the psyche as a rather normative-looking but immeasurably destructive mage. Using this description as an archetypal shard, we compare it to what we know of failed sorcery or failed spiritual power in mytho-history. The Greek Icarus flew too close to the sun, and his waxen wings melted, catapulting him to earth. The Zuni myth, The Boy and the Eagle, tells of a boy who would have become a member of the Eagle Kingdom, but for thinking he could break the rules of death. As he soared through the sky, his borrowed eagle coat was torn from him, and he fell to his doom. In Christian myth, Lucifer claimed equality with Yahweh and was driven down to the underworld. In folklore, there are any number of sorcerers' apprentices who foolishly dared to venture beyond their actual skill levels by attempting to contravene nature. They were punished by injury and cataclysm. As we examine these leitmotifs, we see the predators in them desire superiority and power over others. They carry a kind of psychological inflation wherein the entity wishes to be loftier than, as big as, and equal to the ineffable, which traditionally distributes and controls the mysterious forces of nature, including the systems of life and death, and the rules of human nature, and so forth. In myth and story, we find that consequence for an entity attempting to break, bend, or alter the operating mode of the ineffable is to be chastened, either by having to endure diminished ability in the world of mystery and magic, such as apprentices who are no longer allowed to practice, or lonely exile from the land of the gods, or a similar loss of grace and power through bumbling, crippling, or death. If we can understand the Bluebeard as being the internal representative of the entire myth of such an outcast, we then may be able to comprehend the deep and inexplicable loneliness which sometimes washes over him or us, because he experiences a continuous exile from redemption. The problem posed in the Bluebeard tale is that rather than empowering the light of the young feminine forces of the psyche, he is instead filled with hatred and desires to kill the lights of the psyche. It is not hard to imagine that in such a malignant formation there is trapped one who once wished for surpassing light and fell from grace because of it. We can understand why, therefore, the exiled one maintains a heartless pursuit of the light of others. We can imagine that it hopes that if it could gather enough souls to itself, it could make a blaze of light that would finally rescind its darkness and repair its loneliness. In this sense, we have at the beginning of the tale a formidable being in its unredeemed aspect. Yet this fact is one of the central truths the younger sister in the tale must acknowledge, that all women must acknowledge, that both within and without there is a force which will act in opposition to the instincts of the natural self, and that malignant force is what it is. Though we might have mercy upon it, our first actions must be to recognize it, to protect ourselves from its devastations, and ultimately to deprive it of its murderous energy. All creatures must learn that there exist predators. Without this knowing, a woman will be unable to negotiate safely within her own forest without being devoured. To understand the predator is to become a mature animal who is not vulnerable out of naivety, inexperience, or foolishness. Like a shrewd tracker, Bluebeard senses the youngest daughter is interested in him, that is, willing to be prey. He asks for her in marriage, and in a moment of youthful exuberance, which is often a combination of folly, pleasure, happiness, and sexual intrigue, she says yes. What woman does not recognize this scenario? Isn't that true? We're drawn to the forbidden fruit. We're enticed with ideas of pleasure, indulgence, sexual intrigue. And in our naivety, we open ourselves up to the dark forces. Naive woman as prey. The youngest sister, the most undeveloped one, plays out the very human story of the naive woman. She will be captured temporarily by her own interior stalker. Yet she will out in the end, wiser, stronger, and recognize the wily predator of her own psyche on sight. The psychological story underlying the tale also applies to the older woman who has not yet completely learned to recognize the innate predator. Perhaps she has begun the process over and over again, but, lacking guidance and support, has not yet finished with it. This is why teaching stories are so nourishing. They provide initiatory maps, so even work which has hit a snag can be completed. The Bluebeard story is valuable to all women, regardless of whether they are very young and just learning about the predator, or whether they have been hounded and harassed by it for decades and are at last readying for a final and decisive battle with it. The youngest sister represents a creative potential within the psyche, a something that is going toward exuberant and fissioning life. But there is a detour as she agrees to become the prize of a vicious man because her instincts to notice and do otherwise are not intact. Psychologically, young girls and young boys are as though asleep about the fact that they themselves are prey. Although sometimes it seems life would be much easier and much less painful if all humans were born totally awake, they are not. We are all born unlagen, like the potential at the center of a cell. In biology, the unlag is the part of a cell characterized as that which will become. Within the unlag is the primal substance, which in time will develop, causing us to become a complete someone. So our lives as women are ones of quickening the unlag. The Bluebeard tale speaks to the awakening and education of this psychic center, this glowing cell. In service of this education, the youngest sister agrees to marry a force which she believes to be very elegant. The fairy tale marriage represents a new status being sought, a new layer of the psyche about to be unfurled. However, the young wife has fooled herself. Initially, she felt fearful of Bluebeard. She was wary. However, a little pleasure out in the woods causes her to overrule her intuition. Almost all women have had this experience at least once. As a result, she persuades herself that Bluebeard is not dangerous, but only idiosyncratic and eccentric. Oh, how silly! Why am I so put off by that little old Bluebeard? Her wildish nature, however, has already sniffed out the situation and knows the blue-bearded man is lethal. But the naive psyche disallows this inner knowing. This error of judgment is almost routine in a woman so young that her alarm systems are not yet developed. She is like an orphan wolf pup who rolls and plays in the clearing, heedless of the 90-pound bobcat approaching from the shadows. In the case of the older woman, who is so cut away from the wild that she can barely hear the inner warnings, she too proceeds, smiling naively. You might well wonder if all this could be avoided. As in the animal world, a young girl learns to see the predator via her mother's and father's teachings. Without parents' loving guidance, she will certainly be prey early on. In hindsight, almost all of us have, at least once, experienced a compelling idea or semi-dazzling person crawling in through our psychic windows at night and catching us off guard. Even though they're wearing a ski mask, have a knife between their teeth and a sack of money slung over their shoulder, we believe them when they tell us they're in the banking business. However, even with wise mothering and fathering, the young female may, especially beginning about age 12, be seduced away from her own truth by peer groups, cultural forces, or psychic pressures. And so begins a rather reckless risk-taking in order to find out for herself. When I work with older teenage girls who are convinced that the world is good if they only work it right, it always makes me feel like an old grey-haired dog. I want to put my paws over my eyes and groan, for I see what they do not see, and I know, especially if they're willful and feisty, that they're going to insist on becoming involved with the predator at least once before they are shocked awake. Oh, how I wish Clarissa had been in my life when I was a teenager. I was one of those reckless, risk-taking, naive girls. At the beginning of our lives, our feminine viewpoint is very naive. meaning that emotional understanding of the covert is very faint. But this is where we all begin as females. We are naive and we talk ourselves into some very confusing situations. To be uninitiated in the ways of these matters means that we are in a time of our life when we are vulnerable to seeing only the overt. Among wolves, when the bitch leaves her pups to go hunting, the young ones try to follow her out of the den and down the path. She snarls at them, lunges at them, and scares the bejesus out of them till they run slipping and sliding back to the den. Their mother knows her pups do not yet know how to weigh and assess other creatures. They do not know who is a predator and who is not. But in time she will teach them, both harshly and well. Like wolf pups, women need a similar initiation, one which teaches that the inner and outer worlds are not always happy-go-lucky places. Many women do not even have the basic teaching about predators that a wolf mother gives her pups, such as, if it's threatening and bigger than you, flee. If it's weaker, see what you want to do. If it's sick, leave it alone. If it has quills, poison, fangs, or razor claws, back up and go in the other direction. If it smells nice but is wrapped around metal jaws, walk on by. The youngest sister in the story is not only naive about her own mental processes and totally ignorant about the murdering aspect of her own psyche, but is also able to be lured by pleasures of the ego. And why not? We all want everything to be wonderful. Every woman wants to sit upon a horse dressed in bells and go riding off through the boundless green and sensual forest. All humans want to attain early paradise here on earth. The problem is that ego desires to feel wonderful, but a yen for the paradisical, when combined with naivety, makes us not fulfilled, but food for the predator. This acquiescence to marrying the monster is actually decided when girls are very young, usually before 5 years of age. They are taught to not see, and instead to make pretty, all manner of grotesqueries, whether they are lovely or not. This training is why the youngest sister can say, his beard isn't really that blue. This early training to be nice causes women to override their intuitions. In that sense, they are actually purposefully taught to submit to the predator. Imagine a wolf mother teaching her young to be nice in the face of an angry ferret or a wily diamondback rattler. I'm very grateful to be reading this book at this time, being a mother to young girls, because it is awakening in me and bringing awareness to the way in which we raise our children, especially young girls, and the old traditions of the past, that's the way I was raised, the way my mother was raised, and grandmother. There are still threads of that, even though we're far more modern. We have a lot more freedom than when this was possibly written. But there is always a thread that still ties these matrilineal lines together. And I am very much aware of how I raise my girls now, thanks to these stories, to this awareness that Clarissa has brought to the Bluebeardian tale. In the tale, even the mother colludes. She goes on the picnic, goes along for the ride. She doesn't say a word of caution to any of her daughters. One might say the biological mother or the internal mother is asleep or naive herself, as is often the case in very young girls or in unmothered women. Interestingly, in the tale, the older sisters demonstrate some consciousness when they say they do not like Bluebeard, even though he just entertained and regaled them in a very romantic and paradisical manner. There is a sense in the story that some aspects of the psyche, represented by the older sisters, are a little more developed in insight, that they have knowing, which warns against romanticizing the predator. The initiated woman pays attention to the older sister's voices in the psyche. They warn her away from danger. The uninitiated woman does not pay attention. She is, as yet, too identified with naivety. Say, for instance, a naive woman keeps making poor choices in a mate. Somewhere in her mind, she knows this pattern is fruitless, that she should stop and follow a different value. She often even knows how to proceed. But there is something compelling, a sort of Bluebeardian mesmerization, about continuing the destructive pattern. In most cases, the woman feels if she just holds on to the old pattern a little longer, why surely the paradisical feeling she seeks will appear in the next heartbeat. At another extreme, a woman involved in a chemical addiction most definitely has at the back of her mind a set of older sisters who are saying, "No, no way, this is bad for the mind and bad for the body. We refuse to continue." But the desire to find paradise draws the woman into the marriage to Bluebeard, the drug dealer of psychic highs. A chemical addiction severs your consciousness, severs your connection to your higher self, to God, to source within you. And it leads you astray, it leads you down a very dark path. Whatever dilemma a woman finds herself in, the voices of the older sisters in her psyche continue to urge her to consciousness and to be wise in her choices. They represent those voices in the back of the mind that whisper the truths that a woman may wish to avoid, for they end her fantasy of paradise found. So the fateful marriage occurs, the mingling of the sweetly naive and the dastardly unlit. When Bluebeard leaves on his journey, the young woman does not realize that even though she is exhorted to do anything she wishes, except that one thing, she is living less rather than living more. Many women have literally lived the Bluebeard tale. They marry while they are yet naive about predators, and they choose someone who is destructive to their lives. They are determined to cure that person with love. They are in some way playing house. One could say they have spent much time saying, "His beard isn't really so blue." That's been my experience to the T. And it's been a very destructive force in my life. But I've come full circle. And thanks to embarking on this new path this year and really choosing to step into my own power and turn my life around, to access these amazing resources like Women Who Run with the Wolves and The Artist's Way, to start delving deep into the psyche, into understanding my past choices, into my understanding my behaviors, and it reveals so much about yourself, and doing the work uncovers and unearths all of these poor choices, all these mistakes, all these detours that you may have taken in your life. And while you're in the midst of it, it's the hardest thing to go through. But having come now full circle, I am so grateful for this journey that my life has been on. And I understand why she calls this chapter the beginning initiation, because it is very necessary to go through this initiatory process in order to awaken your consciousness, to awaken yourself to your patterns of behavior, to your psyche, to who you are, to better knowing yourself, to connecting to your intuition, to your higher self, to all these things that will take us further along our path and will help us grow us into being a better version of ourselves, the best version of ourselves. And so this Bluebeard tale has been quite significant. Eventually, a woman thus captured will see her hopes for a decent life for herself and her children diminish more and more. It is to be hoped that she will finally open the door to the room where all the destruction of her life lies. While it may be the woman's actual mate who denigrates and dismantles her life, the innate predator within her own psyche concurs. As long as a woman is forced into believing she is powerless and or is trained to not consciously register what she knows to be true, the feminine impulses and gifts of her psyche continue to be killed off. When the youthful spirit marries the predator, she is captured or restrained during a time in her life that was meant to be unfoldment. Instead of living freely, she begins to live falsely. The deceitful promise of the predator is that the woman will become a queen in some way, when in fact her murder is being planned. There is a way out of all of this, but one must have a key. And I'm going to end there today because there is so much to take on and digest and go away and think about how this story pertains to your life and what you've experienced. As I've said to you, it's been very awakening for me and such a profound journey so far. And I hope it is for you too. I hope you're able to look at your life honestly, look at it with compassion and love, and bring awareness, consciousness to the forefront of your life. And forgive yourself for those past mistakes, because we all make mistakes, and that's part of life's journey, is to make these mistakes, but learn from them, grow from them, bring that new self-knowledge, that intuition, and carry that forward into the rest of our lives. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back for the next part, the key to knowing the importance of snuffling, part 2. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you again soon. Take care.